You're listening to LVB Podcast Show with your friend, advocate, and host, Alvaro.
Hello and welcome to LVB SHOW. My name is Alvaro and I'm very happy to be with you tonight. Before I introduce our guest, I want to say thank you so much to people listening from the United States, from Canada, from Australia, from Latin America, from Europe, from Asia, from Africa, and everywhere else where listeners are right now. Tonight is a very good interview for our listeners because he's someone that has been on the show before. I probably would say you have listened to that show about 4 to 5 years ago already. His name is Naqi Rizvi. He's half Pakistani, half Indian. He's blind and he's right now in London and he has a very exciting news to share with us regarding studying, which is very important. Education is key for all of these planet. So, Naqi, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Alvaro. Great to be here for a second time.
My pleasure, my friend. And before we go into your great successes, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but I'll start and then you stop me if you think it's way too long. Okay, so as Alvaro, you said, I'm half Indian, half Pakistani, and probably half confused. I was born with congenital glaucoma and lost my sight when I was 7 years old. It was a gradual deterioration and had lots of surgeries, lots of interventions, but none of that led to any good outcomes. However, my mum was quite determined to put me in a regular school, so I went to a regular school with sighted girls and boys, being the only blind student there. And of course that meant loads and loads of troubles, and perhaps we could go into the specifics of that a bit later if you want, but if I can quickly fast forward and stuff.
Sure.
I went on to do my O and A levels in science subjects with some adaptations, and then went to university in Saudi Arabia where my family moved because my dad got a job there. I went on to do my degree in industrial engineering. Did very well, obviously loads of challenges, but persevered, and I graduated at the top of my batch, which was really something I was very proud of. And then I got offered a job with an engineering company. It was a Swiss company called ABB, and I started working for them in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia for 2 years. And then I wanted to challenge myself a little bit more and wanted to learn, so I applied to various universities in the UK for masters and then got accepted by University College London, which is one of the very prestigious universities here. And I had applied for a program in systems engineering management, had some visa issues initially, but then managed to get a visa and came to London, and it was really exciting being in a Western world where I had never been before in my life, coming out of my continent and being in this world that, in a way, embraced me with open arms and stuff. But of course, living in such a vast and busy city was incredibly challenging. I did get to grips with that, along with my studies and stuff, and would think that I did reasonably well. So it was a 1-year master's program. I finished it in 2016 and applied for jobs. And one of the biggest barriers that I faced here, being an international student, was that a lot of companies struggle to sponsor international students, either because they don't have their Tier 2 license to do so, or because they prefer not to because of how many hurdles and formalities are involved. But at the end, cutting a long story short, because it was a very long process, I did manage to get a job with a bank who were willing to sponsor my visa. So I decided to take that opportunity and started working in August, which was 3 months ago. And it's been really exciting so far. So that's, in very brief, the story of my life.
Wow, that's pretty exciting to hear and very amazing as well, Naqi, to be honest.
Thank you.
Is the truth, Naqi. I mean, something that I said to our listeners is that people always prejudge our community. They like to say, oh, you're blind, so you are not able to do this, that, and the other. But what people don't do, for our listeners and Naqi, is to say, oh, what you are able to do. They tell us what we are not able to do. And in many situations, they fail to describe that situation. Just listen to what happened to me in a Colombian bank, for our listeners. I went there asking to open an account, and they told me, but you are blind. And I said, yes, so what? And they said, we are not able to give you an account. You need to go to a specific area, a specific place, and ask to decide if you are capable enough to handle a bank account. That, for our listeners, in 2017, yes, in a developing country, but still, there's a lot of ignorance and discrimination going on. So, that's why I say, Naqi, it's not easy for anybody to
Absolutely.
get the results that you have got, more even so being international and everything, and so it has to be applaud your efforts, and I think it's a great example for everybody to follow, because sometimes people think they are not going to make it. They are not going to be able to study what they want. They will not be able to find a job, etc. I would like for our listeners to know, in your view, what it takes to succeed to the level you have being blind today, Naqi. What would you say are some of the tools that have allowed you to be able to study, to graduate, to do the masters in the UK, and also to be able to work for a bank in London?
Oh, wow, that's a really tough question. But I will try to answer it. I do apologize. It might be a little unstructured, but hopefully it will make sense to the listeners. So as you rightly said, Alvaro, there's so many taboos and so much stigma attached to people with disabilities, and obviously part of the blame rests on us as well for not perhaps educating the community. So with shows like yours, I'm sure it goes a long way in raising more awareness, because that's exactly what we need. Because unless people know what we're capable of, they will just assume, and then oftentimes that assumption underestimates what blind or partially sighted or anyone with a disability can do. So that's great. In terms of how to achieve what you want, I would say really the foundation for everything, whether it be for a disabled person or quote-unquote normal person, is an attitude. And I think unless you have that foundation where you can see the glass as half full rather than half empty, I don't think you can get very far, because even if you have all the resources at your disposal, but you don't have that mindset that, yes, I want to do this, and yes, life is beautiful, and yes, I can do this, you won't get very far. And of course, there's determination, perseverance, resilience, all of those things that you need. But one of the other things which I found really important is a good support system. And that could be through different ways. That could be either your family or your school or where you work and stuff, or just the community. So there will always be people that will discourage you, that will tell you, no, you can't do this. And while it might sound negative, you can use that to, motivate you even more. And I often say that people often look at friction as a very negative thing. But if you think about it, a car cannot move on the road were enough of friction. So when it's icy, the car starts to slip and skid and stuff. But because there's friction, a car can move and move super fast without skidding. So while friction is something negative and people in our life are negative as well, we need to use that to propel us forward and go, okay, you think I can't do it? Let me prove you wrong. Not in a bad way, but in a way to say that, yes, I can do this and I don't need you to underestimate me. That support system is really important, and I think for me, the things that constitute my support system even now, of course, are, to begin with, let's say my belief in God, which I think has really helped me overcome a lot of obstacles in life, but the wonderful support that I have from my parents, from my sister, who always encouraged me to do things, to follow my dreams, even though from time to time they get a bit worried, let's say if I get a bit injured in my sports or whatever, but they've never really stopped me from doing the things that I want to. Then my school, my teachers have initially maybe been a bit hesitant, as most people are, but after seeing how determined I was, and then again it comes back to the initial thing, the attitude. Once they saw how keen I was to learn, they did support me. And of course my friends, people at work, and basically anyone that saw how keen I was to learn, how keen I was to progress. And I think once any person, regardless of their ability, is able to convince the other person that yes, I can do this, if I can get that extra support, then hopefully your progress will be a lot better and a lot quicker. And I guess the third thing would be to have the proper equipment. So, for example, for me, I can't really work without a screen reader like JAWS. So even if I had a positive attitude and a good support system where people were supporting me, if I did not have the basic things to help me function, like a walking cane as well, for example, I couldn't get very far. So I think if a person has the right combination of these three, and I know it's never easy, and it doesn't mean that once you have it, you'll have it for the rest of your life. No, you constantly have to replenish it and constantly make sure that it's there. But if you have the right combination, I don't see why a person cannot succeed.
That's a wonderful way of putting things, and I'm sure our listeners understood very well. And I would like to ask you, when it came to reading books, how did you do this?
So that was in several stages, of course. When I was very young, I think it primarily came down to my mom reading books to me when I was at school, and maybe occasionally some friends as well. But as I grew older and I started to use JAWS in my school as well, I used that to read certain material online, but it was still very dependent on my parents, for example, or my friends recording books for me. And there were other organizations, for example, in Mumbai that recorded books for me that I could listen to. But at university, of course, things were a bit different, and because I did not have my family with me, so I moved out when I was 18, just after my A-levels. And while I still used my computer to read material that was accessible and that was text only, in engineering there were loads of books which had diagrams and equations and graphs that were impossible to read with JAWS. So that would mostly come down to volunteers or my friends. And of course, when you ask someone for help, it's always nice to give something back. So in some cases it was a friend would read something to me and then I would explain them what it was, because maybe I had a better understanding for that particular concept. And I guess I would try and make my own notes so I could remember and then refer back to. So even in my master's program, where I did have support workers who used to read some visual stuff to me, I used to make notes on my laptop so I could remember or have them make notes about what the diagram looked like. So when I read the description back, that sort of visual image came back to my mind's eye. So that's how I generally tend to do. Unfortunately, there is no solution so far with screen readers where they can interpret diagrams for you. So there's a lot of human intervention required. But I think what's key for people listening out there that struggle with this is to try and maximize what you can do with a screen reader. So at least use the text bit, and there's different ways now. So even if there's a book that's not available in soft copy, there's optical character recognition softwares that can convert scanned PDFs into readable text, which you can read, and then have someone describe the diagrams to you. And just to add to that, there's other resources as well. For example, a friend of mine that I met here in London has developed a website. I can't remember the name, but I think it's called Graphene. And what that does is you can upload a picture on the website, and one of the experts can describe that picture to you. And it's not live, but there are ways. And of course, there's other stuff, Alvaro, which you may have heard, like an app called Be My Eyes,
right,
where a person has access to your camera and then can see the diagram. So there's lots of ways now, thanks to technology, that people can access book. But then the onus again comes down to the person to reach out and to try and do whatever they can themselves, and whatever they can't, and take human help for that.
Naqi, two comments. One, I did an interview with the developer of Be My Eyes a year ago. That was wonderful.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's a wonderful application for our listeners, already available for Android devices already, as well as the iPhone.
Right.
And the other comment is this. Here in Colombia, there are two things. One is that usually blind and visually impaired students scan complete books, and then they use the PDF to study that in their computers. It takes many hours to scan the whole book. Is that an option? Was that an option for you to scan all the book?
That was an option, and as I said earlier, so if you do scan a book, it obviously comes across as a picture,
right,
so you can't read it, so you have to use optical character recognition software, and there's different ones out there like Kurzweil or Find Reader that people can use to read those books. So that is an option, but obviously there's other apps that can help with that. So for example, the KNFB Reader.
Yes.
It's one app with which you can just take a photo and then that can read it out to you. So it really comes down to what people prefer and what their preferences are. And if I can just add, I know it's slightly unrelated, but for example, softwares like JAWS and stuff are really expensive. So if people are looking for a cheaper solution, NVDA, for example, would be software that's completely free to access.
Naqi, NVDA is similar to JAWS in the way it works, or is difficult to understand?
So that's a question I'm not particularly, I won't be particularly good at answering because I haven't used NVDA extensively. I did use it for a very short time while I was waiting for JAWS to be installed. As far as I've heard, the commands are fairly similar to JAWS, and the original sort of voice in NVDA isn't very good, but then you can download other voice profiles that you can use. So I haven't used NVDA, but one of the comments which one of my friends made was that NVDA works better with tables, for example.
Oh.
But I won't be able to say exactly because I haven't used that extensively. So apologies for that.
And as a smartphone, do you use an iPhone or Android?
I use an iPhone, yeah.
That has been useful, right?
Oh, incredibly useful. I think I've had one since 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And it has been very, very useful because obviously the voiceover, while it's not accessible with every single app, it is majority of the times, and I think it's really helped me make my life easier. And for the people listening out there, I'm sure a lot of blind and partially sighted people, even with voiceover, would struggle with typing. And I used to struggle a lot with that. So what I have done is got a pocket-sized Bluetooth keyboard, which I use, which just has physical buttons. So it's a lot easier for me to type, which means I'm a lot quicker as well. Because some people use the dictation feature, but number one, it's not incredibly accurate sometimes, and number two, if you're in a noisy place, you can't really dictate because there's so much background noise, and it probably won't catch what you're saying. So the Bluetooth keyboard is a really, really good idea if anyone wants to consider it.
Naqi, do you think the future of studies is going to be all books digitalized and available on all platforms. I say that because here in Colombia, they did that. All the college books of Colombia are already in the cloud, and people can access that very cheaply, and they don't have to scan anymore any kind of documents. What do you think?
This is a really positive step from what you've told, because I wasn't aware of that. I don't think in the countries that I've lived in that this has been done so far, and unfortunately I think part of the reason is for certain publishers and stuff, they would not want to make their books in readable PDFs, because then some people can edit them, and obviously they would not want people to copy or edit their material because they have full ownership of it, and they would not want people to pass books on. Because if I'm a lecturer lecturing 20 students, I could have them buy 20 books, which would make a lot more money than just PDFs. So unfortunately, I think unless people start thinking more benevolently and end up just caring about money, I don't see that happening. But I hope it will, because I think it benefits everyone to have books in both hard and soft copies, because some people just prefer reading stuff on their laptop rather than just a physical hard copy.
And do you use Voice Dream Reader?
I haven't heard of that. What is this?
Oh, for our listeners, Voice Dream Reader is one of the biggest apps for reading material on the go. So basically what it does is you can import a Word document, PowerPoint document, Excel document, a PDF document, EPUB, MP3, all of that into the app, and it gives you a player, and the player allows you to play forward, go back, etc., and is fully accessible. I have also done an interview with the developer Winston Chen, who is a wonderful person, and is one of the biggest applications for reading on the go. I recommend it to everybody. It may be about $20, and it's worth every single penny of that. It could, the possibilities that gives you is amazing.
And is that a phone app then? Is that on the iPhone?
It's on
the computer?
Yes, it's on the iPhone, on Android, and on iPad as well.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, I should probably check that out.
Yes. Naqi, one question that I know I asked you this almost 5 years ago, but I have to go ahead and ask again for the listeners that haven't listened to our interview, and is, why do you think so many people who are partially sighted or totally blind don't study industrial engineering and engineering in general in the world?
That's another tough question, and I don't remember my response 5 years ago, so it will probably be different this time, or at least a little bit. I think when you look at people in general, a lot of people are scared of doing something that others haven't done before, others similar to them, or people are really scared to step into uncharted territory. And I think it's no different for people that are blind or partially sighted. A lot of them may want to do science, maths, engineering and stuff, but I guess the first thing that comes to their mind is, yeah, I like this, but how in the world can I do this? And I faced a lot of that as well when I was much younger, because I was considering my options, and I wanted to do all sorts of, weird things, like be a pilot and be a doctor, and that was some of the things that people asked me, how in the world do you think you can do this? So I think a lot of people are faced with those same dilemmas, not just from within, but from without as well. And that probably is the biggest barrier, because if you don't think yourself that you can do it, there's no point others telling you, because you just don't believe that, yourself in the first place. So I think that's one of the barriers. The other, at a more practical level also, is that perhaps there's not adequate technology that can support such people. So for example, in a place like London, where I did my master's, the university is willing to recruit support workers and you don't have to pay for those. But in other, maybe more developing countries, that will not be an opportunity. So students won't really have access to the resources, and that's unfair on them, because then they are disadvantaged and can't get the material that they need. And of course, it could also be that people are not very supportive, so the lecturers might not necessarily allow them extra time or might not help with things outside of lectures if they have to. The other practical difficulty, of course, can also be at a more sort of user level. So, for example, if I am a doctor and I'm completely blind, how many patients would actually trust me? And it would take a lot of time before a doctor could make his or her name as a blind doctor. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I would encourage anyone that wants to be one, go for it. But I'm just saying you have to consider those, and that can put a lot of people off as well. Then, of course, as an engineer, for example, the issue comes, if you do graduate as an engineer, all well, but how will you work? Where will you work? Can you go on a site where there's lots of health and safety hazards, for example? Or can you go to different construction sites and still do things just like everyone else can? Now, of course, there are workarounds where you could have a support worker who could help you with that, or you could be assigned roles that you are better at, for example, analysis or whatever. But my point is that there could be difficulties that people necessarily don't know or don't have the willingness to overcome. And I think unless people have that mindset first from within that, yes, I can do this, and are willing to find alternatives to see how they could progress, they can't really do it. And I think that's one of the things that prevents a lot of people from doing science or engineering. And as I said, I had some of those similar challenges. But because I had that amazing support network, and because my parents and my family were always by my side and were willing to help me overcome some of those challenges, I was able to. And I wasn't of course able to overcome all of them, so I had to go around some of them, and that's what blind and partially sighted people or anyone with any disability has to do all the time.
Naqi, something that it comes to mind also is, how in the world do you have such a great English accent if that's not your first language? How did you manage to learn it so well?
That's a really interesting question, Alvaro. I guess I'll answer that in two parts. The first thing is, yes, English is not my first language, but I started learning English when I was 3 because my mom put me in an English medium school. That was the first thing. But then, of course, my accent wasn't the way it is now. And I think one of the things with me is, and I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to this might be able to relate to this as well, some people are just better than others at picking up accents, and that's something more, I guess, innate in someone. And what I've noticed in myself, when I go to a particular place, and as I said, because my dad's Pakistani, mom's Indian, lived in Saudi, and now I'm here, 4 different countries, what I've realized is when I go somewhere, I'm able to pick up not just the language or the dialect, but the way people enunciate words, the way they pronounce stuff fairly quickly. And I think that's what I noticed in the UK as well. When I came to London, I was able to pick it up fairly quickly. And when I go back to Saudi, for example, to see my family, my accent has changed depending on who I'm talking to, because it's more of a subconscious thing. So while the language itself has been with me since I was young, I think the accent has evolved with time and continues to, and I think will always continue to.
Well, for our listeners, that's very impressive. Very good for your parents. Yes, very good for your parents and for you to be able to acquire all of that knowledge. And obviously our listeners are thinking, okay, he's in London. Tell us about London. How is like living there, taking the subway, the bus? How are the British? How do they treat you? I want to learn a little bit about that, and I know our listeners want too.
I think we'll probably end up having this interview till tomorrow evening in this case. But I'll try to... You probably need to do a whole series on that, Alvaro.
Yes, indeed.
Because it's such a massive topic, but if I can say, it's the only country in the West that the only city, I should say, that I've been to in the West. so I couldn't say what other cities are like in comparison, but what I can compare it to is perhaps other cities in Asia where I have lived. And overall, I think it's a wonderful place to be. And now, of course, it's not perfect. There's things that aren't great, and there's things that could be better. But I really like it here, and I consciously chose to come here and really struggled to get a working visa so I could stay here because I found this place very accessible. Well, not fully accessible, but very accessible. And it allowed me to be independent, and it allowed me to pursue sports, which is something I really, really, really love. And it's given me an opportunity to do that. So London is a massive city. I think they say during the daytime the population is about 14 million people, which is absolutely bonkers.
Wow.
And by the night I think it goes down to 9 million because of all the tourists and stuff, but it's still a really big city. And I think the tube, or the subway, it's called the tube here, is very, very popular because it's really the best way of traveling within the city. And I think just the tube itself has about 270 stations in the city, so it's absolutely massive. 11 different lines, and then you have other stuff like the Docklands Light Rail or the Overground and the National Rail, buses and taxis and trams, like everything that. In fact, you even have ferries that take you along canals and stuff. So there's all sorts of transport, which I find absolutely amazing. Now, of course, because of all of that, because it's so popular, it's an incredibly expensive city. You've got to pay a lot on rent, on food, and all sorts of things. Like anything you buy is just really expensive, and the weather isn't great. And I'm sure everyone knows that. There was a time where I saw 3 seasons in like 2 hours, and I'm like, what's happening? So the weather can be really unpredictable. And of course, there are some areas that are better than others, some that are a bit dodgier, some that are not so accessible. But in terms of the British people, I don't know if I have seen the proper British people, because London is such a melting pot where you have people from all over the world. I read a statistic which said something like 62% of people that live in London aren't born here.
Oh.
That just goes to show you how many people there are that are not from here itself. But the British people that I have met have been wonderful. I think one of the things that most people will agree with, that a lot of English people are quite reserved. So in America, for example, people might just randomly talk to you on the street. Here, maybe not so much. But I think that's not just the English here, but everyone just becomes that. So when you go on the underground, on the tube, you might be sitting beside someone for half an hour and not even exchange one word, which I find a bit awkward. But that's how it is here. And the pace of life is incredibly fast. Like, you don't realize how quickly time passes. You're just running from one end to the other. And obviously, because you have to catch the underground and then come back up and then walk and stuff, it takes a long time as well. So you have to fit in the same amount of stuff in a much shorter time. So everyone is always in a hurry. But it's great because you have all sorts of cuisines, you have all sorts of entertainment, you have all sorts of freedoms. You can practice any faith that you want, you could practice any cult or whatever, and it's obviously a very free society. So, as I said, it's not perfect. I would never give it a 10 on 10, but it's the best that I've found, and I think there's a lot more work going on in terms of accessibility, in terms of making this place better, more crime-free and stuff, and hopefully we'll get there someday. I've been here 2 years now.
And Naqi, do you use GPS applications when you are, as you say, on the tube, or maybe you're going to take a taxi or a bus? Do you use any kind of technology to assist you in that situation?
So, I do use an app called Google Maps sometimes to plan my routes. However, I have to say, which is a great shame, that Google Maps is not the most accessible app, especially when it tells you go northwest, and I have no idea where in the world north is. So I can't specifically do that. But having said that, it is better than not having anything. But there's loads of other apps which I specifically don't use, which people might find useful, like Blind Square, for example. Or there's one here called the RNIB Navigator. So I do use the app if I have to go to an unfamiliar place. But if I know a particular area, if I know my landmarks and stuff, then I can go fairly alright. Maybe sometimes getting some assistance from people in terms of where I am or where a particular destination is. But in terms of other apps, London has a lot of apps that people, both sighted and visually impaired, can use. For example, City Mapper, where you can, plan your routes and stuff. And I use an app called Tube Tamer to look at some of the routes, because, as I just said a minute ago, the tube network is incredibly complex with lines crisscrossing, and you want to find the best way to reach somewhere. Then there's different apps for buses as well to see where a particular bus stop is or when your next bus will be arriving. I don't tend to use a lot of that because, number one, I don't use a lot of buses. I don't feel very comfortable because it's quite hard sometimes for me to find a bus stop in the first place.
Right.
So I prefer the undergrounds. That's what I normally use. And one of the great things about the underground, if I can mention here, is there are members of staff that are always ready to assist. And let's say if I go into one of the stations, let's say King's Cross, and I need to get to another station, for example, Waterloo, I can go to a member of staff and say, I have to go to Waterloo and I need some assistance. And what they do is they take you down to the platform, they radio to Waterloo, giving the train number and where the person is, and someone on the other end comes and collects you and guides you to wherever you have to be.
Oh, wow.
It just makes life a lot easier. And the really cool thing, if I can add, is when they're calling ahead, and I feel really proud when I'm with my friends, they say, I have a VIP going to Waterloo, and I find that really cool because most people don't know what's a VIP. It stands for visually impaired person, but for a random person, they won't know what's a VIP. And they're like, oh my God, check that out.
That's a great anecdote. You're right, yeah, VIP. And Naqi, another question that comes to mind is, do you use services like Uber?
I don't, and I guess part of the reason is because I want to be a bit more economical. So, obviously, black cabs here are incredibly expensive. Uber is definitely a lot cheaper, but because I'm able to get around most places without any issues.
Right.
On the train. And now what they've done is, for weekends, they also have the night tube. So you have the trains running 24/7 on some of the lines, which is really, really good. So I don't really have that particular issue. I have, of course, used it in the past with friends or even on my own once or twice, but never regularly, no. But it is always an option.
Now, when it comes to sports, you were telling me you like sports. So what kind of sport are you practicing?
So there's a lot of different sports that I've tried, and there's a great organization here that I'm affiliated to called Metro Blind Sports, and they run different sports events and stuff that are accessible for blind and partially sighted people. So I've tried a whole lot of sports, like some of them, didn't like others, didn't have time for some of them, couldn't do some of them because of work commitments. So the ones that I regularly do would only be 3, which are blind tennis, goalball, and running.
Oh, now running, you have a guide dog yourself?
No, I just have a cane. I have a guide runner that I run with, so we are tethered together.
Oh.
And I normally have to tell the guide runner how I want to be guided, and off we go then.
The blind tennis, tell me about that.
So blind tennis, it's an interesting one because it's visually impaired tennis, and the reason for that is because there's people with low vision as well as completely blind that play it, and it's divided into side categories. So B1 is completely blind, then there's B2, then there's B3, which are mid-partials, and there's B4 and B5. And for example, a B1 can only play against a B1. But in the other categories, you can play one category higher. So in a B1, which is myself, in a B1's case, the ball isn't incredibly loud in the air, so you can't really hear it, so you know once it's landed. So B1 gets 3 bounces. So once someone's served, once the ball lands in your service box, that's 1 bounce, and then it's 2 more bounces before you have to return the ball over the net. Now the B1 court is slightly smaller than a regular court, and I don't know the exact dimensions on the top of my head, but I'm sure you could find them online. And if I'm serving to you, Alvaro, for example, I'll say ready, then you say yes, then I say play, and then I serve the ball to you. So it's a regular racket, it's just the ball's different, and the court edges are marked out with tactile lines so you can feel where you are. Oh. And of course you have to have a sighted umpire to let you know if the serve and the return were in or out, because that's really hard to ascertain if you can't see where the ball is landing. Then for B3s, for example, that are mid-partials, they only get 2 bounces because they can see the ball to an extent.
Right.
And I think B4 and B5s only get 1 bounce.
Oh, like regular tennis. Right.
Yes, but they still play with the sound ball, so they play with a regular ball.
Right. How interesting. I have only played blind baseball.
I've never played that. I've played regular baseball back in school, but never blind baseball. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I played in New York, and I played with some Italian people, and because they were developing the baseball league in Milano, and so they were playing with us and some Americans, and it was pretty nice. For our listeners, I was not great, but I was all right. Basically, you have a sound ball, also very similar probably to the tennis ball, and you have the referees, and you have the bases that you have to run to, and it's just regular baseball, but the sound ball is the only difference really, that you have to hear where is landed and be able to find it in the air if possible with a little sound that it makes. It's interesting, to be honest. But now that you tell me about the tennis, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to know more about the baseball thing as well, because I have a few questions about that, but maybe I can ask you after the interview.
Sure. And Naqi, I have a question regarding the mind of someone that is studying engineering. What I'm trying to say is that I studied travel and hotel management in my days, and obviously it was much easier than engineering. My question is, for such a complex career, because I know that I have friends in engineering, how do you prepare mentally to such challenge, having to overcome the obstacles that you have to overcome daily, plus you have to study something really powerful where you have, as you very well said, diagrams and certain things that are going to be obviously more complex for you than for someone that is able to see the diagrams. You have to dedicate a lot of time, I suppose, to planning. But how did you manage to do the studies and the masters mentally? I want to know that part, because I know for our listeners the importance of the mind in everything. And when you have a big challenge like studying a whole career, the mind is critical. It has to be on your side. So attitude is very important, but also the mindset has to be, you have to be extremely focused, compromise, you have to be very organized in your mind. How did you manage that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think part of that I have already covered. But what I will say is that I'm someone that really likes challenges to begin with. So even when it comes to other facets of life, I do like to challenge myself, be it living alone in a completely new place, or trying out a little bit of cooking, which has never turned out good, or, playing playing different sports or doing engineering and now working for a bank. So I'm someone that enjoys challenges. And as you rightly pointed out, a lot of things, I think, in my case, when it comes to diagrams or inaccessible stuff, might take me twice the time than it would for my sighted peers. But I guess when you're committed to doing something, when you really want to achieve that, when you have that burning desire, you will do it. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, the three sort of important things that you need to be successful are applicable for engineering as well. Because engineering is not just tough for me, it's tough for everyone.
Right.
Whether they can see or not.
Right.
But of course, for me, there was an added challenge. However, the good news is that if you are blind, doesn't mean that your brain's affected, so you're still probably as smart as anyone else, or in some cases even smarter.
Right.
So the challenges that you face are not really intellectual, but more the practical side. And as I was saying, if you have a good support system, which can take a lot of time and a lot of effort, not just to build, but to sustain, as long as you have that, you can do it. And I will not lie and say that it was an easy journey. I think every single day I used to struggle, and it was like, what have I got myself into? Do I really want to do it? Should I give up? But then, you know, one of the things that really motivated me was when I was younger, I think my mom used to tell me that it is my dream to see you graduate as an engineer. And because I'd seen how much effort she'd put in, you know, to help me cope at school and stuff, that sort of motivated me. So I think one of the things that people need in anything that they do, even if they're sportsmen and stuff, they need to have something to motivate them. And that could be anything, because maybe it's something that your loved one wants you to do. Maybe it's something more intrinsic to you yourself want to achieve that. And I think if you have that at the back of your mind all the time, you will be able to make your mind powerful. And I have to say, moving slightly away from engineering, I've noticed that this stuff is incredibly powerful with running. So when I started running, I found it really hard, because you sweat and you have no oxygen, and then you can't breathe, and you go, oh my God, I want to stop. And then someone told me, mate, the finishing line is 200 meters away. And then that tells you, okay, I can do this. And then you sprint to the finishing line. And I think what that made me realize was it's all in my mind. When I know where the finish line is, when I know how far it is, I can do this. So why can't I make small steps for me that I can conquer every day? So for a lot of people, they might go, oh, I want to be an engineer in 4 years' time. And yes, that's a really good thing, but most likely you will not achieve it. And when you ask successful people, that's one of the things they tell you. Don't aim for something too big and say, I will achieve it. Aim for that big thing, but break it down into small steps. Take those baby steps every day. Say, today, that's what I'll do. In the case of running, for example, today I'll run 500 meters without stopping. Okay, then tomorrow I'll make it 600, and slowly. And I think it took me a couple of months, but then I reached a point where I did a 10K run without stopping for even a second. And I was like, oh my God, last year I couldn't have imagined that I'd be able to run 10 kilometers without stopping for even a second. But because I kept telling my mind, come on, you've done 4 kilometers already, there's only 6 to go. Imagine the glory that you will feel afterwards. Imagine how good it's going to feel when you're going to have that medal around your neck. And imagine how many cheers you're going to get from the people that will be watching you crossing the line with your guide run. Like, all those sorts of things motivate me. So aim for those little baby steps and just keep telling your mind, I can do this. Because if other people tell me I can't, my mind knows otherwise. And I think that's really the thing. You have to build that mental strength. And there are days even now when I feel frustrated, and I tell people it's perfectly fine to be sad sometimes, to cry, to feel frustrated, but don't make that a regular thing. Once it becomes chronic, that's where the problem is, because no one can be happy and content all the time.
Right.
When I get lost sometimes, I feel incredibly frustrated. Or if I'm getting late, other people can run to a meeting. I can't. I still have to walk slow because I'll bang my head into something. So I can't walk faster, which means I have to be more organized and leave before time and stuff. But hey, that's how it is, and everyone has their own challenges. But you just have to make your mind stronger. Just condition it in a way that intrinsically, whenever you're faced with a challenge next time, hey, I can do this.
Naqi, I was not planning on asking this. I have two last questions for our listeners. I had one, but I'll have to ask you the final question, this other one that I have in my head right now.
Go for it.
Because I'm curious about your opinion. But before that, I would like to know how it's like working in a bank when it comes to accessibility. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
I think people's experience would be quite different because obviously depending on where you are, things would change depending on what bank you work for, but also depending on what role you do. So the bank that I work for has been awarded some disability prizes, and obviously I won't say it's perfect because no bank is. I've seen that in the three months that I've been, that some processes aren't as good as they ought to be. But in the case of my bank, what I found to be useful is that people are willing to help you. Even the processes and stuff are broken in some cases. Things go very, very slowly in a massive organization with, say, 80,000 people. But people understand where you're coming from, to an extent, of course. But I would say the onus, again, to a large extent, comes on the person, which is myself. A lot of my team have never worked with a person that is blind or partially sighted, and they don't know. They try their best based on what they know, but it's my duty to educate them. And one of the things that I have done is to organize a training for vision impairment awareness so that they can get some idea about this. So things have been a bit turbulent for me in the sense that in the past 3 months, it's taken me a while to get some of my accessibility equipment in place. It's taken me a while to sort out a lot of those things. But slowly, things are moving. And I don't think there's any organization that is always accessible. I, for example, struggle with the building as well sometimes because I work in the head office, which is 31 stories tall, has about 11,000 people. So it's a lot of things to navigate around sometimes.
Right.
But again, because I'm determined, and because I do try to ask for help. And Alvaro, if I can just mention one thing, which just came to my mind right now, because I struggle with this sometimes,
sure.
And I used to more so than now, was some people, blind and partially sighted people, think that asking for help is the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say that is not the case. Just because you ask for help doesn't mean you're weaker or incapable. For example, managers, MDs, and directors, they have PAs to help them out not because they're incapable, just because it makes life a lot easier and they're able to do better things.
Right.
So yes, you could struggle and reach a meeting after an hour and just say, I'm so sorry to be late, but no one's going to be impressed that, oh my God, you got to the meeting by yourself. People will be impressed when you contribute and add value to what they're saying. So if someone's going the same way, it doesn't hurt to say, is it okay if I walk with you? So in a lot of instances, when I'm walking to the office, I know my route because I do it every single day, but sometimes kind people ask me, can I give you a hand? And my point is not to inconvenience anyone. So I ask them, if you're going the same way, can I tag on to you? Because it would just mean I can walk without having to worry about all the obstacles in my way. And in other stuff as well. If you can't access certain materials, if you can't be very productive because things aren't on your side and the equipment isn't there, ask for help. Because if you don't ask, you don't get. And if you don't get, you will never be able to show to people how capable you are. So please do ask for help whenever you have to.
Naqi, I have to agree with you. I also have to agree that some people, and not very few, sometimes struggle to say, please give me a hand. And it's very important to say it when it's needed. That's really critical, and I appreciate that you said that. So finally, this question probably will surprise you, but I have done interviews with scientists. I have done interviews with leaders in the technological world about how is going the race to find a cure for blindness. And before you respond, for our listeners, I want to say this. You are right now, what, 25, 26?
26, spot on.
Correct. You have easily 50 to 60 years of life ahead of you.
I would hope so.
Me too. So, do you ever think about being able to see, understanding, Naqi, that technology is going further beyond saying if you have a retina working well, you will recover the sight, or technology is going far beyond that. It's saying probably, and I heard that from a scientist from the BBC just about 6 months ago. He said we are probably 15 to 20 years away from finishing many of the issues dealing with disabilities, and blindness is going to go away because not only we're finding ways of recovering and restoring sight with specific chips that are introduced in the retina and things like that, but we are discovering the immense power of the brain and how the brain can make you see, can make you move the arm that you haven't moved in 40 years. And things like that are going to happen, yes or yes. I'm absolutely convinced of that. But is Naqi ever thinking about that? You don't care? Do you care? What do you think about it, Naqi?
I do care, but I don't think I think about it every day. And the thing with me is I will probably never be able to get a cure in my particular case. And the reason for that is, so I lost my sight when I was 7 because of congenital glaucoma, but I used to have pain in my eyes 24/7. They used to water all the time. They were really sensitive. My intraocular pressure was really high. And in 2014, I developed an ulcer in my eye, and cutting a really long story short, the doctor recommended that I go for a process called enucleation, in which both my eyes were removed, including the muscles, and the optic nerve was cut because that was the main source of pain, because that was a nerve ending. So they cut the optic nerve, which now means my eyes, which are basically a silicone implant with a PMMA polymer, do not have any connection to the brain. So even if there was a cure, let's say with stem cell research, where they could regenerate the nerve, I don't have the eye anymore. So for me, I could probably never get a cure. But does that make me despondent or disheartened? Maybe to an extent sometimes when I wish I could see, but at other times I feel what's more important than having to focus about whether I have all my 5 senses or not is what is the quality of life that I lead? What is the impact that I want to have? And, you know, Alva, you may have heard about some people that got their sight back somehow, either through installing a camera, for example, or whatever, but didn't necessarily do better. In fact, I heard of a case where someone committed suicide because they felt so depressed.
Yeah.
Because think about it, for me, for example, if I got my sight back, I'd have to learn how to read, how to write.
Yeah.
I wouldn't understand everything. I'd have to see all the disgusting stuff around me, which at the moment I can't see. So I might view something a lot more prettier than it is. And that's one thing I tell people.
Yeah.
You know, everyone in my opinion is a beautiful person, because I don't know what an ugly person means, because I don't remember anyone's face. So I like to make friends with people who I think are good from the inside. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Once I start seeing ugly people, it won't be nice. So for me, what's more important is that I have a good quality of life. I'm able to do the things that I can, but more importantly, I'm able to have an impact. If I was just another regular Tom, Dick or Harry in the street, perhaps, you know, I would just do a 9-to-5 job, get a house and get a family, settle down and die, and that's it. Whereas now, I've had the opportunity literally to speak to thousands and thousands of people, and hopefully had an opportunity to motivate some of them, to let them know that, hey, you can achieve your goals as well, because just like I have I haven't let my blindness become an excuse for me, and you don't need to let your problem or shortcoming become an excuse. So hopefully I will be able to have an impact that even when I die, some people will still be like, there was this man called Naqi Rizvi that lived, and he touched my life in a positive way, and that for me would be the biggest success of all.
Well, I cannot say anything else because you said it right. In Naqi, I have to ask a last one right now, and is,
go for it.
What is next for Naqi? You're gonna work in this bank and everything, but what is your dream job?
I don't know if I have a dream job, because I think I'm still continuing to discover myself, to discover my passion, and that I think is really important, because once you feel you know everything about yourself and you know exactly what you want, that's when you stop learning. So when I was doing university, for example, I was pretty keen on just doing something in engineering, because that's what I'd studied in my undergrad and my master's, but then this opportunity came along. I'm like, wait, let's take a step back. You know, what's my main purpose? Is it just to become a better engineer, or is it to become a more well-rounded individual? In a bank, I'll get an opportunity to perhaps develop more skills that can then help me do something else later on in life. So as of now, as I said just a minute ago, I want to have a positive impact, and I want to help people achieve their goals, and of course help myself achieve mine. So I'm really hopeful that in a few years I will be able to become a life coach, because that's what I want to do. And I want to become a public speaker, so I can go to people, talk to them about my challenges, and tell them, if I can, you can as well.
Well, I think it's been a very, it sounds cliche, but it's true, inspirational talk with Naqi Rizvi again from London.
Thank you, Alvaro.
My pleasure, and for our listeners who want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to be of help to anyone that I can be of service to. So Alvaro, if someone can get in touch with you through their website, could you pass my email and my number to them, and I'd be more than happy to link in with them and you know, have a chat and see how I could be of any use to them at all.
Sure, count on it. Count on it, my friend.
That's great.
Well, Naqi, thank you so much for your time and expertise, and congratulations.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a wonderful conversation, and your success is very, very inspiring to me and to everybody.
Thanks, Alvaro.
My pleasure, and for our listeners, remember always to smile. This is Alvaro from LVB SHOW saying good night.